Hello guys, I'm Unstable Voltage and welcome to my Europa Universalis 4 tutorial. This video carries straight on from my previous Common Sense tutorial and will detail some of the major changes in the new Cossacks expansion DLC. Now, the patch notes for the Cossacks DLC are about 18 pages long, there's over 600 lines. Most of that is just balance changes and bug fixes. What I'm going to do in this video is cover the major mechanical changes to the game, at least some of them. As always, whenever Paradox release an expansion for EU4, there are some changes that you only get if you purchase the expansion, and then there are some general changes that get released in a patch that everybody will receive regardless of whether or not you bought the expansion. So just a quick little bit of information about what is going on this current version of the game. This is currently 1.14.2.0. So if you are playing the game and the patch version has changed, it's quite possible that some of the information in this video may have been altered. It's very common for Paradox to go back and change some of the mechanics, rebalance some things because they're a bit buggy or they're not working. So please don't come moaning to me if the information in this video is wrong when the patch numbers are different, because it means something has changed. So we're going to go in. I will hopefully be able to show you most of what I'm going to be talking about. There will be a couple of bits and pieces that I will have to just read from the patch notes because I can't actually show you. Just some other quick information, I have all of the DLCs up to date installed. So as you can see here, we have Conquest of Paradise, Wealth of Nations, Res Publica, The Art of War, El Dorado, Common Sense, and the new Cossacks expansion. You will also notice that my map looks slightly different because you can see all of the thicker borders. That's just because I'm using the thicker borders and recolored water mod. I'm also using the translucent diplomatic mod, which is why you can see some of the mountains and the terrain textures through the map. Those are just cosmetic mods and don't make any difference to the game. Now what I'm going to do in this video, I'm going to start by going through the expansion features, the ones that you only get if you purchase the Cossacks, and then I will go through some of the features and changes that you will get as part of the free patch. Before I do that though, one thing that is actually free that I will just point out now while I'm on the main menu is the random new world has now been updated. So if you have the expansion that allows you to build the random new world, which is Conquest of Paradise, now they have patched it to make the random new world much better. It'll give you much more interesting land masses, and it'll just make building a random new world more fun and more interesting to discover. On top of that, if you now go into the options, there are a few new things in here in the options. First of all, you have colour-owned wastelands. So if the player now manages to grab 51 or 50% or more of the provinces surrounding a wasteland, the wasteland will then turn to your map colour and your country name will be written across the wasteland. So it's still wasteland, it's not valuable, you can't move through it or do anything with it, but at least it reduces some of the border gore. That's the main reason that has been added in there. There is another new thing called exclaves. Exclaves is basically when you colonize a province, colonize a region somewhere. And what will basically happen is it will now use, if you've got this option selected for exclaves to use region names, it will actually have the region name. So say, for example, we were looking down something like here on the Cape of Africa, so or even something down here like the Ivory Coast, and let's say we were playing as England. So normally if we took this, it would just say England, it'd all be England. If we actually took this now, it would say it was the English Ivory Coast. So that's just, again, another slight cosmetic change. And then finally we've got Fantasy Random New World. This is an option that allows for advanced native empires to appear in the random new world. That only really makes any difference if you use the random new world. If you just use the historical new world, you will get historical nations. So I'm going to start off by going through some of the changes that you get in the paid expansion, and to do that we're going to be taking a look at one of the hordes. So I'm starting off here playing as the Oirat because I wanted a Horde nation that also had the Tengri faith, because there's something else that I want to show you guys later. So the first thing that you'll notice, one of the changes to the Hordes, is they've now gotten rid of legitimacy, and Hordes have Horde unity. Now, Horde unity trends down by default. As you can see, it's actually changing by minus 2.31 every year. It goes down by a base value of 2 per year as it is, and then it's also affected by your total development. Now, having Horde unity increases your army discipline and also reduces your national unrest. Now, this ticks down, and the only way to get it back up is to do things such as looting and raising provinces. So, essentially, you keep your Horde unity high by being at war. Now, this replaces an old mechanic that Hordes used to have, where if you didn't go to war for a certain period of time, you would start getting negative events that would spawn rebels. Well, instead of having those events now, you just have this Horde unity, and the lower the unity drops, the more national unrest you will get. So in order to fix that, as it says, you have to loot and raise provinces. Now, Hordes can loot provinces anyway. When you go and attack a neighbour, if you sit in that neighbour's province, you will actually be able to loot it and take some of the money from these loot bars here. But the new feature that's been added is the raise feature. Now, in order to raise a province, you must own it, but it mustn't have a core on it. So the time that you're most likely to raise a province is right after you have captured one from a neighbour or from an enemy. So what happens is when you capture a province, if it doesn't have a core on it, as in it's not one of your cores, this one would be, because this does have an Oirat core on it, but if we grab this one, for example, this doesn't have an Oirat core. So if I was to take this province in a war, then before I core it, this button will allow me to click it. And what this basically allows me to do is reduce the development of that particular province by up to a third. Now, it will round up to 1 if the development of that province is less than 3 in any of these particular categories. So, let's say, for example, I was to take this province here. What's going to happen is I would hit the raise province button. The first thing that I would get is I would get the full contents of the loot bar. So, I'd get an instant 9 ducats. It would also then reduce the development in each of these categories by 1/3. So, it would take the development down to 2 in both tax, production, and manpower. Now, for each development that we raise, we gain 25 monarch points in that category. So we'd be reducing development in tax by 1, so I'd gain 25 admin points. It would reduce development in production by 1, so we'd gain 25 diplo points. And it would reduce development in manpower by 1, so we would get 25 military power. Now, as I said, bear in mind, it will always round up to 1, so if the development is only 2, 2 and 2, it would still reduce it by 1. If the development were 10, for example, we would be reducing it by 3, and we'd get 75 points in each of our monarch point categories. This is something that will most probably get a balance change. I suspect before anything else happens, this will get balanced, because it is so strong at the moment as a horde to go around and take lots of land, and then all you have to do is raise everything, because you get a lot of free money. It increases your horde unity, so it's really easy to keep that at 100%. You also get lots and lots of free monarch points, which means it's very easy to stay ahead of the technology curve, even though hordes are in the nomad tech group, which means they pay 175% of the cost for technologies. They can actually keep up with the Western world at the moment because of all of the free monarch points they can get from raising provinces. Not to mention, raising provinces lowers their development, which makes them cheaper to core, and also reduces the amount of overextension that you get from them as well. So sometimes you can actually take, in a war deal, in a peace deal, you can actually take so much land that you're overextended, but then you can instantly go and raise it all, reduce its total development right down, and your overextension isn't as high. So that is the raise mechanic as a horde nation, and that is going to be very, very strong. One other thing that has been changed, this is the reason why I picked Oirat, is because I wanted a Tengri faith horde. So Tengri have this new mechanic where they can choose a syncretic faith. Now what that allows you to do, it allows you to pick another faith, and it'll be the list of faiths that you can choose from are based on faiths that any of your provinces have, or faiths that any of your neighbouring provinces have. And what you can basically do is you can choose one of these neighbouring faiths, and that becomes your syncretic faith. Now, the advantages of doing that, first of all, each of the different faiths that you can pick for the syncretic faith has its own bonuses, which you can see here on this this list. So the one you pick will have its own bonuses. On top of that, your nation will treat the syncretic faith as if it is your own in terms of acceptance. So, for example, if we chose Sunni as our syncretic faith, then we would treat Sunni nations as if they had the same faith as us, and we wouldn't have a diplomatic penalty against them because we wouldn't assume that they were a different faith. We would tolerate them as if they were our own faith. At the same time, it works both ways. If we were to pick Sunni as our syncretic faith, the Sunni would also treat us, the Tengri, as having the same faith as them, so we wouldn't get a penalty with them either. So that's the way the syncretic faith works for the hordes. Also, well, for the Tengri hordes. Also, if you don't choose a syncretic faith, you do actually get a little bonus anyway without having that, which is the national unrest and the reduced regiment cost. So you do have to be careful which one you pick, but it is certainly an interesting little change there. So that's most of the changes that have been made to the hordes. So what I'm going to do now is jump over to France, probably, to show you some of the other stuff that has changed. Okay, so I've now switched over to France, and doing that little switch just reminded me of one very important thing. Now in EU4, if you go back to the main menu, or you switch between single player or multiplayer and vice versa, it will actually do a complete restart of the client. That is intended, and it's supposed to be to solve some problems with certain things being left over in memory. So whenever you go back to the main menu now, do remember your client will restart completely. So let's look at some of the other things that have been added in the expansion. First of all is a thing called diplomatic feedback. Now, what diplomatic feedback is, if we go and click on another nation, if we go and have a look at the province view, you will see that we have these three tabs here. So things have changed quite drastically on this screen. You can see a lot of things have been sort of rejigged around. So we've got these three tabs. We've got our normal diplomatic actions tab, as you will have seen before. We've also got the opinions tab, so it's much easier now to switch between the opinions and the diplomatic actions without having to click a little button down here. But we've actually got this new button here on the right hand side, and this is diplomatic feedback. And what this allows you to do is it allows you to look at a different country, and you can see various bits of information about them. Some of this information was always there in the previous games but was hidden, such as trust, for example. Well, now you can actually see this trust. So, for example, playing as France, England views us with distrust. So the trust meter goes from 0 to 100. 100 means they trust you implicitly. 0 means that they don't trust you in the slightest. And 50 is neutral. So at the moment, England distrusts me. If I was to go down, for example, and click on Castile, you can see that Castile are willing to trust me somewhat. If I was to go down to some of the other places around us, there probably aren't really any around here that actually trust me an awful lot at all, but we can certainly go ahead and have a look. Even Burgundy there, they don't trust us. Now, trust is a very important factor because this comes down to how likely someone is willing to help you. Obviously, you will lose trust by promising things and not delivering, by ignoring your allies' calls to arms. They will lose trust in you. However, if you start to do things to help them, like you give them land in peace deals, or you go to war when they ask you to, you will build up trust with them. Now, you also have a list of things called favours. This is a relatively new mechanic, and as it says, favours are a measure of how much, in this case, Burgundy owes us for good deeds we have done them in the past, such as helping them in their wars and giving them territory they want in our own wars. So basically, the longer you stayed allied with someone and the more you do to help them, the more favours you will gain with them. When you gain a certain number of favours with somebody, you can call those favours back in by asking them to go to war with you. So Let's just go and ally someone to start with. Let us go straight in at the moment and go and try and ally Castile. So let's go in here, diplomatic actions, and we would like to offer an alliance to Castile. We'll do that straight away, and we'll just unpause the game until that ticks through. There we go, we have our alliance with Castile. Now, if I was to go to England and try and declare war, Castile wouldn't be willing to come in. You can see that by the red X here. Now, it's actually saying that Castile does not owe France at least 10 favours. So we get minus 1,000 because they don't owe us at least 10 favours. So we certainly have to get an amount of favours before they would be willing to do that. Now, there is another little button here that you'll notice, this little speech bubble, and this is Castile has not been promised territorial gains from this war, and you will need to spend favours to convince them to join. If you don't have any favours, you can always go ahead and click this button. Now, it doesn't always mean that they will join, because it says here, Castile does not want any England land that France hasn't claimed. But if there was some land that Castile wanted, that belonged to England, we might actually be able to get them to join with us and go for the fight. Now, how can you tell who wants what land? Well, this is another thing that has been added with the diplomatic feedback. If we actually go in onto the diplomatic feedback button, and we've got our own nation selected at the moment, you currently see that we have these 3 red provinces here. Now, the reason that these, sorry, 4 red provinces. The reason that these provinces are red is because they are provinces of interest. Now, these are automatically provinces of interest because we have cores on them. And it says here that France views Caux and Normandy and Gascogne and Le Bourg. France views this province as vital interest. Provinces of vital interest are considered part of a country's national borders. They are likely to attack any country holding it and unlikely to ally another country that is laying claim to it. So this is a new mechanic that allows us to say to our neighbours, look, I want these provinces, so don't declare war for them, don't make claims on them, these are mine and I will be fighting for them. Now, what I could go is I could turn around and look at Maine and Anjou here, and I could click on those and say, these are of vital interest as well. So I'm saying to my neighbours, such as Brittany here, for example, don't declare war for those provinces, don't fabricate claims on those provinces are mine. So you have the option of doing that to tell your neighbours which provinces you are likely to take. You could never untick any that you have a core on. Now, sometimes you will see that some provinces or some nations will actually have yellow provinces marked. Now, if I actually click on Burgundy here, you can see that Burgundy consider most of France to be there. So Burgundy is going to be really, really hostile. If we click over here, right, now, okay, we've got Provence selected and they have some yellow provinces. Now, these ones are viewed as a province of strategic utility. Now, that means they'd like to take it if the opportunity arose, but they're not specifically going to declare war for it. They'll take it as an opportunity, but they don't necessarily want it. So you will see those around as well. Now, there's a few other little buttons that are around here, especially with your allies. So what you can do, again, we'll click on Spain, because, well, Castile, because we've already allied with those. So you can now manually assign your attitude towards one of the other AI. Now, it's not going to make a lot of difference here because our attitude is allied. We're already allied to Castile. If we were, for example, to go over to, say, Burgundy, we could go to Burgundy. I mean, Burgundy is actually rivaled towards us at the moment. But we could go in and we could manage our attitude and we could turn around and say we are hostile towards Brittany, or we're friendly towards Brittany, or even we are threatened by Brittany, although they're not at least 33% more powerful than us, so we don't have that option. But that's a very, very useful way of manually setting your attitudes, which you were never able to do before. So you can try and stay friendly to someone even if they hate you and increase your diplomatic reputation with them. You can also just declare that you're hostile to somebody and let everybody know that you don't like that particular nation, and that will hopefully mean that your friends won't make friends with your enemies. So this is some interesting stuff that we've got there. There's also a couple of little extra buttons here. Again, you will see this better if we actually go back down to Castile. And again, we do need favours here for this. But there's two things you can do. First of all, you can actually spend favours to increase trust. And the second one here is this: ask them to prepare for war. This is a handy little button because what it basically means, if you have enough favours and you need at least 10, and you ask your ally to prepare for war, they will increase their maintenance for full. They will try and build their army up to their force limit. It will stop them from declaring any offensive wars for the next 2 years. And it will also make them more likely to join you in an offensive war. So basically what you're doing is you're going to your ally and saying, look, I'm going to start a war. I want you to help me. Get ready. And that gives the AI 2 years to build up his army and get ready to support you. How many times have you played a game before where you have decided, right, I'm going to go and declare a war. I've got my ally with me. Things will be great. And just before you declare the war, they get in another war. They're not willing to join your war, or they've not got enough army, or their maintenance is at minimum and whatever. So this is a really, really good way to get one of your allies to join you in a war. So those are the sort of changes with the diplomatic feedback, and I think that's going to be quite a useful thing there. We probably wouldn't be able to get an alliance with Burgundy, so I can't show you the other thing. But what I could do, let's say I could get Burgundy to be my ally, which I can't because they're set as a rival. But if Burgundy was my ally, Burgundy actually have Co and Normandy as provinces of vital interest. So if Burgundy was my ally, what I could do is say to Burgundy, look, if I promise to give you land, will you go to war with me against England? And even without any favours, they'd probably say yes because they want this land. Now, obviously, they're then going to expect me to give them that land in the peace deal. If I don't give them that land, they will lose trust. So that's another one of the ways that that mechanic works. And that is probably one of the biggest single changes in the Cossacks expansion. Now, one of the other changes is something called estates. You can find estates by going into your nation view and clicking this new button that has appeared right on the end. This is the estates view. Now, most nations will have 3 estates. Some nations, like the Hordes, only have a single estate. They have the tribes. So we've got the, and I apologise because I cannot pronounce this, the Borgiais, the clergy, and the nobility. So these different estates are basically its internal politics. You have to give a certain amount of land to each of these estates, and they all give you a certain amount of bonuses or penalties depending on their loyalty. You can see their loyalty here. You've got their loyalty level, so we're at 40%, 40% and 50%. Then we have their influence, and then we have their territory. So you mostly gain loyalty by granting more land to the estate. So as we can see, these guys, if their loyalty is above 60%, we get 5% reduction to development cost and plus 10% trade efficiency. If their loyalty is between 30% and 60%, then we just get the plus 10 trade efficiency. If the loyalty is below 30%, then our development cost becomes higher and we lose some trade efficiency. Obviously, there are different modifiers for the 3 different estates. Now, one thing you want to avoid happening, well, there's actually 2 things you want to avoid happening. First of all, you want to avoid the loyalty falling too low, because as they become less loyal, you're going to lose these bonuses, and in fact, you're going to end up with penalties. Secondly, you want to avoid them becoming too powerful, having too much influence. If they have too much influence, then there is a possibility that they can actually try and take over the country. So as you can see, the nobility here, the nobility have quite a lot of influence, and that's because they actually control quite a lot of the land. Now you have these interaction buttons over here, and what you can actually do is for each of these different estates, you can ask for different things. So for example, we could gain 60 ducats, but they would lose 5 loyalty. We could demand diplomatic support, so we get a free 50 diplo power, but again, they would lose 15 loyalty. We could lose 5 prestige, but we could actually gain influence. Well, they'd gain influence, but we'd also gain some loyalty. So you can play these little mini games to actually grab extra stuff from them. Some of them are greyed out because we don't have enough loyalty in the first place to be able to do that. And they are different between each of the different estates. So we can demand administrative support here. We can make a generous donation, so we can actually spend 60 ducats and gain 10 loyalty. If we go and look at the nobility one, we can call for a DA. We would lose 5 prestige, but we would gain 10 loyalty with them. Well, they'd gain 10 loyalty with us. And they'd also gain some influence, though. We could gain a general with 40 tradition. but they would gain 20 influence. We could demand military support and instantly gain 100 military power, but they would lose 15 loyalty. So you've basically just got this minigame where you have to keep these guys happy. So if you want to see at a glance which of your provinces are owned by the nobility, you can go in here and click on the political map modes button and select estates. And you'll be able to see in different colours which provinces are owned by the estates. So they're all color coded. So let's say, for example, we wanted to give one of these to somebody else. So we could go into Berry, for example. And then down here under the buildings tab, we have the estates. As you can see, Berry is not currently held by an estate, but we could go in there and we could select one of the estates to give that land to. Now, we would get a bonus for doing so. So as you can see, if we were to give Berry to the clergy, it would increase their loyalty by 5.5%, and it will have the following effect on the province. The province would gain -2 local unrest. If we pick the nobility, it would gain 50% local manpower, or plus, 50% local manpower, and if we gave it to these guys, we would get 50% local trade power. Now, it's worth bearing in mind that all of them actually say that the minimum province autonomy would be 25%. So basically what happens is, if you give any of your provinces to an estate, it sets the autonomy floor at 25%. That does stack with other autonomy floors as well. So if you're playing as a Horde, for example, who already have a 25% autonomy floor, if you then gave one of the provinces to the tribes, who are the Horde's estate, then that province would have an autonomy floor of 50%. So there are some downsides to giving provinces to the different estates, and those downsides are that it increases the autonomy, but you do gain something from them. So for example, there's quite a decent amount of manpower here in Berry. In fact, have we got one that's just got a particularly highly developed in terms of manpower? Let's try and see what our highest manpower province is here. Either way, it often makes sense to choose the estate that would give you the biggest boost. So for example, if we went over here to Paris itself, which isn't currently controlled by an estate, well, you can't do it with your capital, I don't think. No, but so we go back to Berry. Berry doesn't have the highest of military power here, but it would make sense if you had somewhere that had a lot of military development to give that to the one that gives you the manpower modifier and so on. So you can basically build up on individual provinces, but that's how the estates work in the Cossacks expansion. So there are a couple of other things that have been added in the paid expansion that we'll quickly just go through. And the first of those is going to be the native policies. So if you go to the stability and expansion tab, you will see you now have these three buttons that appear under the expansion range. Now, you used to get events whenever you had colonies. Every now and then you'd get an event that popped up and said that, what are you basically going to do about the natives? Are you going to try and kill them? Are you going to let them integrate? Or are you going to leave them alone? So you now basically have these three different options. So you need to have a colonist before you can switch between any of these native policies, but the buttons are still there. So you've got the coexistence policy, which gives a native uprising chance of -100%. This is ideal for people who are starting very early on and want to do some colonizing. You don't have to worry about getting your troops over to a colony to protect it, because what you can basically do is select the coexistence policy and it completely removes any chance that the natives will attack you. You've got the option here in the middle, which is the native trading policy. Now, this does have a native uprising chance. It is still -50%, so you're not likely to get as many native uprisings as you would if you choose the third and final policy, but you will also get native assimilation, which basically means that when you actually turn that colony into a city, it will gain some bonus to its development from the native assimilation. And then finally, you have the native repression policy, which gives you global settler increase, so it will become a city. Well, it'll become a city. It'll become a city even more quickly. But there's the full chance that you will get native uprisings, and you won't get any of this assimilation. Now, switching between these does cost something. I can't remember what it is to do it at the moment. It's either some monarch points or some prestige or a stability or something. I can't actually remember off the top of my head, but it does allow you to switch between them. So that is a very, very useful thing for people who like playing the colonial games. One other thing that has also been added in a peace deal is if you actually go to war with somebody who has a colonial nation, in the peace deal there is actually a concede colonial area option, which will basically ask them to give you every single province that they have in a particular colonial region. You've also got the options to declare a colonial war. Now, when you declare a colonial war, you can only do that against overseas opponents. If you declare a colonial war, you can no longer bring your allies in. Obviously, things like your vassals, personal union partners, and your colonial nations will still join the war, but you can't call your allies in. So what's the point of that? Well, what that allows you to do now is when you declare a colonial war, you can actually call in your protectorates. So that's actually making protectorates a bit more useful, because they haven't been useful for a very long time. Another nice thing you can do, you've now got the option to threaten war. So if you have a core on a province, we've got cores on England's provinces over here. We could go into England here, and we should have the option somewhere. We've got the option to declare a colonial war. That would be there. That's where the button is. It's on the war declaration screen. I think it is down here somewhere. Threaten war. There we go. It's under influence actions. So what we can do is we could go, for example, and go threaten war. And we could say we're going to threaten war against Normandy. Now it actually tells us what their chances are of accepting, and we can see why. Now, the idea of doing this is you might be wanting to take a province from a small nation. Maybe you can crush them quite easily. But maybe you don't actually want to go to war with them because you're just trying to recover your manpower and you just want to take the province. If you can take a province and avoid a war, why not? And this is what this particular thing is. It allows you to say to someone, look, I want to take this province. You either give it to me or I'm going to go to war. Now, if you do this, obviously you can tell whether or not it's going to happen. If I was to send this declaration to England now, they would say no and a war would ensue. However, if we actually had enough reasons for them to say yes, they could just give me the province. So you've always got that option to threaten war, which I think is quite a nice little thing that they've added in there. Couple of other things. One thing they've now added under culture change, if we go into change culture. So as you see, we've got a few different cultures down here. You now actually have the option when changing a culture to choose which culture you change to. So if you see, we've now got this select button here at the top of the culture change screen. We can actually select which culture that we convert to. Previously, you were only able to convert people to your own primary culture. You can now convert people to your sort of secondary cultures. Any culture that you actually have either neighboured or part of your own nation, you can convert to that culture. The reason for doing that is maybe you have a particular culture that isn't your primary culture, and maybe you just need a tiny little bit more of that culture in your nation to accept them. So you can take one of your other provinces and convert it to that culture. So you have that option now, the advanced cultural conversion. So again, one of the things that's been added on the paid expansion. Couple of other things that they've added that I can't really show you right now. First of all, you can now name your heir. Whenever a new heir is born, it gives you it will name it randomly, but it is a box where you can type in your own custom name if you wish, or there's a dice which you can keep clicking on, which will continually generate random names for you until you get one that you are happy with. They've also removed the ability for you to sell provinces to your subjects. You can now grant provinces to your subjects. You can give them for free, but you can no longer sell them, so they've removed that option. You can actually also grant cause and claims to your vassals and subjects as well. So if I actually had a claim on a moor, then I could go, let's say for example Provence were my vassal and I had a claim on a moor, I could grant that claim to Provence and then Provence would have a claim on a moor. So again, some more changes to the way that diplomacy works to try and make your vassals and subjects a little bit more useful. A few other things that are really nice that they've now done. First of all, you can now build directly to armies if you have one of your armies selected, and this also works with navies as well, by the way, assuming you've only got one selected. You'll see these buttons up here. So what you can basically do is if I wanted to add, say, 3 cavalry and infantry to this this army here, I could go and click the infantry button 3 times and then click the cavalry button. And what that would do is it would automatically queue up some units in neighbouring provinces. And when those units are finished building, they will automatically head to the province the army was in when I click those buttons. It won't follow the army around. If I was to go and move this army now into a different province, the new troops would still all form up in Paris. But it's a very, very good way if you are just trying to rebuild an army that you've consolidated or that you've taken some heavy losses on. You don't have to worry about sort of deciding which provinces to build in and then getting everybody to group up and move them to the right place. Just select the army, click on the buttons, and you can see it actually tells you here how many units you've got that are being produced and waiting to join that army. That is a nice little quality of life feature that I quite like, to be honest. Now, you can also build in subjects as well. So if you have a subject, remember a subject is a protectorate, a personal union partner, or a vassal, you can actually or a colonial nation. You can now actually train troops and build boats in their provinces, providing their liberty desire is below 50%. This is also going to be absolutely excellent when you are colonizing, because if you're colonizing in the New World and you want to be able to fight some of the other colonial nations over there, or you want to go to war with the natives, you don't have to worry about shipping all of your armies over into your colonial nations. You can just build armies directly in your colonial nations provinces, which is a really, really nice thing. What else have they added in? There's also now an option to distribute spoils. So basically what happens is when you go to war, if you have an ally with you in that war, the game will actually track how much contribution each participant of the war has made. So no longer does the war leader get 100% of the war score from all of the battles. If I was to declare war against England and Castile came in with me, and I just sat here in France doing nothing, and Castile went and did all the work and killed all of the English armies, Castile would have a huge amount of the war participation. Let's just say, for example, Castile had 80% of the war participation. If I was then to peace out with England, Castile would expect to get about 80% of the war deal. If I didn't give them 80% of the stuff taken in the peace deal, then I would lose trust with them. And another way it works, and this is something that you can't actually get around, is if I was to take money from England, Castile would get 80% of the money that I take because they did 80% of the work. If I was to get war reparations, Castile would get 80% of those war reparations because Castile did 80% of the work. So it's made it a little bit more difficult now to go to war with someone and stiff your allies in the peace deal. So that is a nice little interesting change. A couple of other abilities that have been added. Both of them are under the espionage idea group, which is not really used all that much, certainly in single players. First of all, you have, and I've got to find where it is now, may study technology, shady recruitment. What this allows you to do is if you have a diplomat, you can send that diplomat to another nation, and providing that nation has a technology level that is at least 2 techs higher than you in any particular field, you will gain 1 monarch point a month in that field. So let's say, for example, and I know this isn't the case, but let's say, for example, England were 2 techs ahead of me in military ideas, or two techs ahead of me in terms of their military. I could send a spy there, and I would basically gain 1 military point every month because they're 2 techs ahead of me. Now, it's not really ever going to affect you as a Western nation. It's more likely if you're playing as someone like in the Chinese tech group or the Nomad tech group. If you can spy on someone who's Western, because they're most likely going to be well ahead of you, it gives you a good way of trying to gain some additional monarch points. Basically, it's to help you catch up. That is the main reason that that is done. There is another option as well, which is this one. Destabilizing efforts. Now, it always allowed you to sow discontent, but also allows you to agitate for liberty. So basically what you can do is you can send a diplomat to somebody's subject, and you can try and increase their liberty desire. So those are all of the main changes that have been added in the paid Cossacks expansion. I'll just quickly rattle off some of the changes that have happened freely, so everybody will see these changes even if you don't have the Cossacks expansion. First of all, a new mechanic has been added called Revanchism. And basically what that means is a country that loses the war gets a boost to their income and manpower recovery after the war's ended. So it's designed to allow a nation that has been beaten in a war to recover more quickly. How often do you see it in EU4 where one big nation like France goes and picks on Burgundy, for example, beats the snot out of them, and then as soon as the war ends, somebody like Austria dives straight on them and takes them out before they have a chance to recover? Well, the idea is if you lose a war, you get that boost to manpower and that boost to tax income just to allow you to try and rebuild your army. And I think it's also based on the war score lost or the peace deal. So the harder you lose, the more revanchism you get, the more bonus you get to that manpower recovery speed and that tax income. The way that mercenaries works has also been changed, so that's quite an interesting little thing here. The way mercenaries used to work is you would be given a set number of infantrymen, cavalrymen and artillery that you could choose from. Sometimes you'd also have 2 different types of units because you might be on that sort of border between tech levels changing. Well, this is actually changed now. As you can see, it says I've got 29 available, and that's in both categories. And the reason for that is because you now have a total pool of mercenaries you can have, and I think it's a base of 20 plus 33% of your force limit. So, or 30% of your force limit. So if the base was 20 and then our force limit is 32, so 30% of that would be about 10. Obviously there's some rounding issues there, but that's basically the way it works. So if I was to go and recruit a cavalryman, sorry, an infantryman, so this is a mercenary infantry. If I was to go and recruit one, you can now see the number of available cavalry has gone down by 1. So we're only allowed to have a total number of mercenaries, but we can spend that total over any of the different mercenary types available. Also, mercenaries now automatically get upgraded to the latest unit type when your technology increases, so you don't have to worry about manually increasing that, so that's quite a nice little thing. What else is there? So you can no longer go through canals when you're at war if you're the canal controller. This isn't going to affect most people, but there are places where you can build canals. So for example, if you were to control these provinces down here, you can build the Suez Canal. It's also possible to build a canal through here somewhere in Denmark that allows you to cut from one side to the other. And then you've got things like the Panama Canal and all stuff like that. Now, canals are pretty expensive to build. They cost a lot of money and they take a long time, but previously anyone could use a canal. Once it was built, anyone could use the canal. But at least now you can stop your enemies from using it in a war, which is fantastic when they can't use the Suez Canal to cut around Africa. That can make a real difference, but that isn't going to affect most people for the most part. So there are some new map selection tools. You'll naturally now see down here you actually have 10 hot buttons for map modes as opposed to the original 6, and they use by default the top row of the keyboard, Q through to P if you're using a standard European QWERTY keyboard. But you'll also now see that you've got these new buttons here. So these new 4 buttons break the map modes down. So you've got political map modes, diplomatic map modes, economy map modes and geographical map modes. You'll also see that some of these will scroll as well. If we go ahead and click the regions button, you will see all of the different region names. Obviously, some of them you can't see because they're in terra incognita. But this is basically what would happen. These are the regions that you would see. At least I think it's regions, or is it areas? I think it's the areas. These are the areas that you would see if you actually colonized or took over land. So, for example, if we were to take this land here, this would become French Asturias. So these are the different regions that I was talking about in the, or the different areas I was talking about in the beginning of the video when we looked at the options for using, I was sure it was region names, but it's basically just to show you how the regions and the areas are broken up into these little different pieces. As you can see, Castile is actually quite small. Most of it belongs to Leon and Toledo and a few other places as well. But these are the new map. There aren't really many new map modes that have been added. There are one or two, but it's mainly just a cosmetic change to the layout, really. What else have we got? You now see a map icon when two armies are about to go to war with one another. Now, that is something that I will show you in a second, because I don't think we actually have an army there. Well, we could do that, actually. We could go ahead and do it with Brittany. We probably don't have a CB against them, but we can go ahead and show that. The macro build has been given a bit of an update as well, so if you actually want to go in and create templates for your troops, what they've now allowed you to do is actually add mercenaries into the mix. So you can build a template for regulars, you can build a template for mercenaries, or you can mix and match the two. So that's one of the free changes that everybody gets. Obviously, the country view, when you go and look at this, they've given it a facelift and changed the layout of it. We've already covered that mainly. One thing that I do like is army and navy maintenance will now be automatically raised and all forts will be activated when you enter a war. This is an excellent feature. If we go in and just, for example, put down our army maintenance, we'll just go and put the army maintenance down. How many times have you been declared on or gone to war and forgot to put your army maintenance on? So we can go through, we can go ahead and we will go and mothball all of our forts. Let's do that. All the forts are mothballed. But we have this button now, and as long as we've got it ticked, automatically raise maintenance during war. So as you can see, we're not at full maintenance. All of our forts are mothballed. I'm just going to go ahead here and declare war on Brittany. I probably don't have a CB against them, but that's fine. I don't really care. So I'm just going to go ahead and declare war on them without a CB. And as you can see, all of my forts have now become activated, and my army maintenance is up to full. So that is absolutely fantastic. It's a brilliant way of not having to remember to do that. And just going back to that other mechanic, if I were to click on this province now, you can now actually see that there is this little crossed swords icon that is telling us that there will be a battle over here. It'll tell us when the battle's going to be. It's a good way to look at the map at a glance and see that a battle is going to happen, because that icon actually scales. So even if you zoom out to a certain degree, it's a really obvious icon. You can quickly look at the map and go, oh, there's going to be a fight here, and you can go and zoom in and move your troops around and do whatever you need to do. So that's a nice little thing to have there. So by all means, go and have a look at the patch notes. They are freely available on Paradox Plaza. It's well worth having a look because there are a lot of changes that have been made. What I've covered in this video is mainly just to try and show you guys the main changes that have been implemented in the Cossacks expansion, and also some of the stuff that you will get in the free patch. One final thing which I should mention, actually, I did make a note of it and I haven't brought this one up. The way it used to work is if you were to completely annex a nation, so you completely wipe somebody out. Let's say, for example, I go over here and I manage to siege out all of Brittany and I don't kill their army. Now, what would usually happen is the moment I annexed Brittany, that would be it. Their army would just disband because the nation would no longer exist. What would happen now is if I fully annex Brittany, their troops would remain on the map as nationalist rebels. So bear that in mind. If you're ignoring somebody else's army and you're going to try and get rid of the army just by full annexing their nation, you will no longer get rid of the army. The army will become rebels and you'll still have to deal with them one way or another. But those are the main changes that have been made in the Cossacks. For any more information, please refer to my previous tutorials on common sense, because most of the mechanics are still the same. One thing I haven't mentioned, for good reason, they have supposedly updated the way that the zone of control mechanics work on forts, but it doesn't seem to work. It's still causing problems. The idea now is that a fort is supposed to have a zone of control on all of the neighbouring provinces, not just the friendly ones. So it basically now means that you cannot avoid a fort by sort of cutting around it and nipping through third-party territory, because if someone was to try and get past this fort here, they couldn't just nip around the outside here through Navarra and Labor. They would still be caught by the zone of control. It still seems a bit hit and miss in the circumstances where it works. So I've got a feeling that that's going to get some more work, but do bear in mind you might notice some changes to the way that forts work, particularly the fact that if an enemy now captures one of your forts, that fort will put zone of control down and you will be affected by it, even if it's your own fort. Obviously the same goes for the enemy. If you take one of your enemy's forts, they will be affected by its zone of control, which you will be in charge of. So it's going to make sieging a little bit more difficult. It's going to make it so there's a good chance that you can get your army stuck trying to siege out a fort and you won't be able to move out of its zone of control until the fort falls. That's going to make life a little bit more difficult, but I still think it's a little bit broken, so I shall wait until they sort of fix that before we go into a great deal of detail on it. So thanks a lot for watching, guys. I hope you found this video somewhat useful to detailing some of the changes in the Cossacks, and if you do have any questions, please ask them in the comments and I will do my best to find out the answers for you. Thanks a lot for watching, guys. Until next time, goodbye for now.